check out our sponsors, Nature's Blends. They specialize in premium Ethiopian black seed products. The website is in the description link below. You can also use the discount code SALAM10 for 10% off their products. So, brothers and sisters who are watching this, welcome, inshallah. So this video, I really want you guys to pay attention. We're going to try to keep it under 30 minutes, and we want to cover some areas when it comes to consciousness, because it's something I would like to understand more better, because I don't usually use it in my arguments when I'm having a discussion with atheists. But like brothers like Jake and Ustad Sharif are people who have been in the field for a long time, who are doing amazing work, and really wanted to, I wanted to give them my platform as well in the context, because I believe, they do brilliant work, alhamdulillah. And we're going to try to keep it, simple as much as possible, inshallah. But it's a very powerful argument for those out there, the Muslim youth, that you can use if you're having a discussion with your atheist friends. And in general, there might be non-Muslims that's watching this. We can have an understanding, because we do have a story of a specific atheist brother, we'll say, atheist brother. How does atheist brother? Well, they're brothers in humanity anyways, but he's a Muslim now. So the question is, and he had his own YouTube channel. He was known in the atheist circles. And for him to accept Islam via this argument, I'm sure it's going to leave you guys interested as much as me to find out what did you guys, Ustad Sharif, I think he was involved, Brother Jake was involved, if I'm not mistaken. What is it that you convinced him of, that it changed his whole perception about his worldview? So I want to start off. I don't know. It's up to you guys wherever you want. But let's go.
Brother Sharif can go first.
Yeah.
Okay, inshallah.
Okay, Ustad Sharif. So,
so this brother, alhamdulillah, when he was an atheist, we went through various arguments for the existence of the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
And he seemed to acknowledge that these are strong, good arguments, but he couldn't let go of materialism. Yeah. So this idea that everything that exists is basically a product of the physical material world.
Yeah.
And so a few weeks ago, we had Hamza Soltis on, other brothers talking about materialism, and more specifically consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness. And then after the show, which he did watch, we then had a follow-up discussion with him, and he finally accepted this idea that materialism is not the fundamental thing that can explain everything, including consciousness. And so really it was this discussion about consciousness that opened his eyes to say that there are causes or things within the universe that exist that cannot be explained purely from a materialistic perspective. And this is what many of the philosophers in science, philosophers on the mind, many neuroscientists, they call the hard problem of consciousness, which is basically trying to explain why or how materialism produces consciousness. And they say that many of them say there's an unbridgeable gap. There's an inability to bridge physical things and the emergence of consciousness within human beings.
So that's brilliant. So now, how would we, what is, in a nutshell, can someone explain to me, okay, when we say materialism, can we just give a understanding of what exactly that is, where is it used, etc., and in what way is it used? So Brother Jake, can you explain to us, when we say materialism, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about materialistic people? Are we talking about people who are after money? Are we talking about something else here?
Yeah, no, we're not talking about it in that sense. We're talking about it in philosophical worldview sense. So materialism basically refers to the idea that all that exists is just matter in motion. So the physical stuff that we see, atoms, molecules, that kind of thing, they say that's all that exists. The idea of things like God or angels, anything like that, that doesn't exist because they're not physical objects. So that's basically what materialism is in a nutshell.
Okay. And obviously, like, for example, a lot of scientists and the scientific method of using our five senses to come to conclusions by the scientific method. So we're basically saying that there is more than our senses in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So, you know, smell, touch, hear, see, taste. Yeah. So these senses, we're saying there is a different world bigger than this, in a nutshell, right?
Right, right. And the materialists reject that. And so when we talk about consciousness related to that, we're saying that consciousness doesn't fit under materialism. It's something else above that can't be explained by, just matter and motion.
Scientists or people in that atheists reject that notion. They believe everything is materialistic, everything that's okay. So Ustad Sharif, let's get into it. So tell us a bit about consciousness. What do you mean by it? Break it down to us, inshallah. Let's understand, when you say consciousness, what is it? Is it someone saying, I'm a conscious person? Is that what we're talking about? Or is it, delve into it a little bit more, inshallah.
Yeah.
With your consciousness, of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's not too complicated, this discussion about consciousness, because we're all conscious, so we all have that experience. And what is that experience? It's the first person experience of the world around us. It's the ability to be aware that we are aware. Yeah. So, we're not just a robot. When you look at a robot or even a computer, the computer's not aware of its own existence. It's not aware of the experiences that it's having. So it's having the awareness of experience. And that's the first part of consciousness. The second part of consciousness is, let's say, Jake's hat. Jake's hat is red. Yeah. Now, we have a particular way of experiencing that hat that is not explained in any of the physical components of the hat. So we look at the color red, we can say from a scientific materialistic point of view that it's the reflection of light at a specific wavelength, at a specific energy. Yeah. So these are the properties of light. Now, everything that I've described in the properties of light do not explain anything of the property of the color red. Yeah, so redness of that hat is something that emerges in our mind. It's a conscious experience, not something that comes from the physical. Yeah. Another example, just to explain that point, is if you had a person who is blind from birth and you try to explain to them about photons or particles or atoms, you could probably explain it to them. Yeah. You'd explain, maybe the mathematics of it, all of these things. But I couldn't explain to a person who's been blind from birth what the color red looks like. Yeah, what this experience is. It's indescribable in that sense. Whereas science looks at what is describable in a third person objective way. But consciousness is a first person conscious experience or subjective experience. It's what I experience and what conscious people experience. And it's something that comes about not because of the physical properties within matter.
So basically, it's a personal experience, like how it is for me to have, for example, my mom always says, when it comes to flavors and colors and choices, these are things that you can't argue with, because each person has its own. You can't go to someone and say, no, why don't you try this food? It's very nice. And they're like, oh, I tried, I don't like it. No, why? It's very nice. That's his experience that he's had with that. I come from a Kurdish Turkish background. Let's talk about chicken doner kebabia. Why not? If I say chicken doner, I don't like having chicken doner at all. Someone might say, no, actually, I love it. I have it every day. But it's a personal experience, how it tastes to me, my experience with it, and that goes with everything. So you're saying each person has that innate experience with everything around, like even pain, even emotion, even sadness. One person, like sometimes, and this is very interesting because, Allah says in the Quran that He will not test us with things that we cannot bear. And that's very interesting because that changes from individual to individual. Because if somebody, like I've seen people who have lost their children, yeah, and I know some people, if they lost their children, they might, psychologically, it could destroy them. But to some people, it's like, you look at them and they're like, wow, like if that was me, man, if I was in your position, I would be like, I don't know how I would have handled it. But you look at certain people and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created different people in different ways, that their test to them is different to yours. What you might deem to be, really hard or whatever it may be, you can't bear. Another person, you get what I'm trying to say? It's like Allah's created in that, we have that inner consciousness, inner experience in different ways, and we're tested via that as well. I think maybe that relates. I'm not sure. Okay. So in a nutshell, okay, we've got the idea behind that. Okay, so we understood what materialism was. We understood, kind of got a grasp of what consciousness is, self-awareness is. how did you guys introduce it to this brother who was an atheist? What was the first thing? Was he at first apprehensive? Was he like, you know what? How can you just give me a little storyline, maybe? How you guys got into the discussion, maybe, and the objections that he had, and how that was, countered, maybe.
Do you want to take that, Sharif, or you want me to take it?
Go for it, Jake. If you miss any details, I'll add some.
Yeah, so I mean, we had been talking to this brother. We presented him other arguments for God's existence, things like the kalam, contingency argument, these different things. But then we presented to him this sort of argument from consciousness and how it couldn't be explained by materialism, because he was a hardcore materialist. He was like, if I can't touch this, I can't taste it, it's not real, it doesn't exist. So we said, well, what about your conscious experience? It can't be quantified. You can't put it under a microscope. And so we started to talk to him about this more and more. His initial reaction was to say, well, it's an emergent property of the brain. It sort of arises from the brain matter. But when we discussed this with him more, we said, no, it doesn't really work. And we can get into more details if you want as to why it doesn't work. But eventually you saw, well, it can't actually be explained by the brain matter. It doesn't make sense how all of a sudden this conscious experience just emerges out of physical material. And after a couple of weeks of discussing this with him, he realized that he couldn't really explain how you have consciousness on materialism. And so he just abandoned materialism altogether and accepted that there are these other things like consciousness that exist. And the reason why this is important to take note of is because our understanding of God, he's not a physical object. It's not like you can put God under a microscope. And so when you show that the materialist, well, there are other things even in your own experience that you have, such as your conscious everyday experience, then it sort of opens them up to the idea that other things like God and angels and jinn exist.
That's interesting. Sorry.
So Ali, I was just wanting to add as well, because this is really important, because a lot of people will say the automatic response will be, because, yeah, but we can cut a person's brain open and we can see the nerves and the neurons and the brain chemistry that's going on in there. But this is like when you have a computer and you look at the program within the computer and you see the ones and zeros. Yeah. Now, the ones and zeros don't tell us anything about the experience of what those ones and zeros mean, or the information. You need a mind to decode that information. Yeah. And the computer itself, it's operating on ones and zeros, this binary code system. It doesn't suddenly give itself experience. It doesn't suddenly realize its own awareness.
So it doesn't have choices.
Exactly. So it's like, again, another example would be like Morse code, dots and dashes. Now, if you saw dots and dashes, but you didn't have information already in your head how to decode the dots and dashes, then it's just dots and dashes. So you need a mind to decode that. So it's, in essence, you need a mind to understand what's going on in the brain in order to have the ability to say, well, this is why this particular neuron's firing, it's resulting in this particular thought. So you have to have a mind prior to the brain doing its, the neurons firing and the action potentials and all these things that are going on in the physical brain. And just as a final point regards to this is, and this is really, I think, hits the nail on the head. When you come across a person, whether that's a person's child or mother, you don't turn around and think the person's not conscious because you not physically saw what's going on in the brain. You already made that conclusion that they are conscious. So you're concluding upon something that's not physically directly observable, but you're concluding that they do have it, which is consciousness in and of itself. So if you can use that same process of thought for understanding other people are conscious, you can use the same process of thought coming to the existence that the creator exists as well.
I sometimes use the argument, the love. I sometimes say, sometimes it comes across wrong, because if you're giving dawah to a female and you go, can you show me love? And it comes the wrong way. Like, I don't mean show me love. I mean, like, can you show me love? Like in a materialistic sense, because the thing is, they would like, if we plug some you know, because you know sometimes people say show me love, brother, you know, and it might come up. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about showing, you know, physically showing me, you know, sometimes I had to make it clear because the person opposite me gets the wrong idea, you know. I'm like, I don't mean it like that. I mean, like, you know, can you show me like physically? And they're like, no,
Yeah.
but if we put, you know, these things in your brain and I'm like, yeah, but you're showing me waves. I'm talking about, can you show me and say, oh, look, this is my love towards you, or my love towards my mother. You can't.
Yeah.
It's something, you know. So you can see that, you know, not all atheists, but some of them, they have this, you know, double standards. Sadly, you know, they do have this belief, you know, into the unseen world, you know, be it consciousness or the emotions. But yeah, okay. So I'm just trying to.
I just want to add on to that point, because you're right. You're hitting on an important point. Love is a function of our conscious experience. It's just one example of what we're talking about. And where, I mean, like you're saying, can you open up a brain or show on a scan, like, oh, these are the neurons in the brain that are, you know, this set of neurons for is responsible for me loving my wife, and then these other ones over here are the ones that are responsible for me loving my brother or my friend. We don't have anything like that in even in current neuroscience today. They can't actually pin that down. So that's part of the issue.
Even
That's part of the issue. And also, what's part of the issue is, even if, let's say, for example, even if they say, look, oxytocin.
Yeah, I was about to say,
this oxytocin is being released. But what's within, you know, if I wanted to study oxytocin, this chemical that's being released in the brain, I can study carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, what other elements that it makes up, the particular physical structure. But none of those properties, this is the point, none of those properties have love within it. That's not a property. That's not an attribute. That's the thing. You have this this is why they call it the hard problem, because you have this mysterious property that arises which can't be reduced to what it physically is. Everything else within nature, within the physical world, we can reduce it down. So, for example, even your physical body can be reduced down to genes, and you can say, well, if this gene codes for that, this gene codes for that particular, hand or an eye or whatever. But when it comes to neurons and the properties within the neurons and the properties within the physical world, none of them contain this property of what we call consciousness and conscious experience.
Exactly. And that leads on to our question of the hard problem of consciousness. And like you said before, even if they were to gather that information and be like, this part of the brain is responsible for love, the thing is, you can never measure intrinsically that, like, what that person's love towards his wife or mother is. That's something that he personally knows, the love and the sacrifice he would do for that person. Nobody can go and measure that. Nobody can come and say, this person's level of love, there's this measurement. Look, this is what. Nobody can. It comes back to innate. It's something that's innate. And going back to the hard problem of consciousness, tell us a bit about that. What is the hard problem of consciousness? Is this where scientists and atheists are having a tough time tackling, so much so that there are genuine atheists that are actually being convinced by this, like with this brother that we have who was convinced by this argument. Maybe this played a role. So tell us a bit about the hard problem of consciousness.
Yeah, so I'll take that, and then Sharif, if I miss out on anything, you can add it. But it goes back to what we were talking about, like what Sharif was saying about the Morse code, or with the computer, the ones and zeros, is that you can explain even brain function in terms of input output, but you can't explain the experience of that. So the hard problem of consciousness deals with what's called qualia, or this first person subjective experience of what you were talking about, Ali, of basically you can explain maybe even the input and output and sort of the function in the brain for love or these different emotions, but you can't explain the experience of it, right? So there's this added element that is on top of more than just the function. And this is what an interesting problem, because today we talk about like artificial intelligence and can basically machines become human minds and stuff like that. And the answer is no, because there's an in principle problem, or sort of an unbridgeable gap between the simple input and output and the experience of it. For example, our computers or phones, whatever we're on right now, they're running on a particular software and hardware. There's input and output, ones and zeros in the background, but the computer is not having an experience. Like, even if you program it to say certain phrases, no matter how eloquent it is, we don't attribute an experience of that to the computer.
For example,
yeah.
Project, just sorry to cut. It's like me going to my computer and saying, like, I'm sorry, I'm making you work too hard. And yeah, Ali, can you stop, pressing that button? It's not, it's systematic, it's programmed.
There's a really good example. I can't remember the philosopher. I think it might be John Searle.
John Searle, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about the Chinese room. Yeah, he gives this as an example. So he said, you've got a person inside this room. He doesn't know any Chinese. Yeah. Then you got Chinese people outside the room, and they're writing him Chinese letters, notes that have meaning, and they're sending it inside the room. He doesn't know any Chinese, but what he's got a rule book. And in the rule book, it says, if you see these symbols, these letters, Chinese letters, you respond with these Chinese letters in response. And so he's sending the message out. And so the people outside the room thinking, oh, this guy knows Chinese. But what he's simply doing is just doing input output. He's seeing the letters. He doesn't understand what the meaning of those letters. He's just saying, if I see these letters, I respond with these set of letters back. Yeah. So what he was explaining is, this is what AI does. This is what computers do. Computers don't fundamentally understand the experience or the knowledge of the information. They're just responding in different ways, and maybe even complicated ways, but they're not experiencing the information, understanding it, and then repeating it back or responding with that particular information. So this is why it's a fundamental, it's an in principle problem. David Chalmers, another philosopher.
Yeah, and I want to read a quote from him, actually, if I could, just a quick quote, because this term, hard problem of consciousness, was put forward by David Chalmers, who was a philosopher, and he explains very nicely what the hard problem is. He says, what makes the hard problem hard and almost unique is that it goes beyond problems about the performance of functions. To see this, note that even when we have explained the performance of all the cognitive and behavioral functions in the vicinity of experience, as perceptual discrimination, categorization, internal access, verbal report, there may still remain a further unanswered question, which is, why is the performance of these functions accompanied by experience? And so that's what we're talking about, is with a computer, there's a performance of functions, but there's no experience. With us, there is a performance of functions that is accompanied by an experience. It's not just love. It's what it's like to love your wife, what it's like to love somebody else. That what it's like is the experience rather than just merely the function. And that's what on materialism you can't explain. You can explain the input output like a computer, but you can't explain the experience of it. So that's the hard problem.
It certainly is a harder problem, a big problem for atheists there.
But a lot of atheists, when you explain this to them, the first reaction is always to say, no, we'll find out in the future how consciousness works. This is what they always say. Science of the gaps.
What do you think of that name? The science of the gaps, yeah?
Yeah, science of the gaps.
It's like a religion.
Yeah. But the problem here, Ali, is that you can't, science deals with what is external to the human being, a third person objective analysis. But this is a first person subjective experience. For example, I can see Jake's hat and I see it's red. You see it as red. But do I see the same red as you? To have the same experience? I can't know that. Yeah, we can say, what we're seeing is red, but your experience of red will be maybe different to my experience of red. And there's no way that science can tell me whether we are experiencing it the same way. So it's not just a problem which is in the future. It's a problem where there's an unbridgeable gap. Science deals with what third person objective analysis.
Exactly.
Consciousness is a first person subjective experience.
Yeah, and you can see. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, there was this dress that was going around in social media, and they were saying,
Yeah.
what color do you see? I don't know if you remember, yeah. So some people were like, oh, green, this, that, and I was thinking, like, these people are bugging out. Like, I was doubting them, and they're probably doubting me, yeah. But it goes back to this argument, because at the end of the day, that's what they were seeing, so it refutes this whole materialistic concept.
Even if both people are seeing green color dress, how do we know that the both of them are seeing green in the same way? Yeah. So that's the problem.
You can never measure that. And Sharif, you're right. They go to this, oh, well, just because we don't know now, maybe we're going to find out in the future with the advancement of science and all this. And that's when I say, well, you get on Muslims and theists all the time for this idea of faith. That sounds like you got more faith in science, bro.
Yeah.
I mean,
they do. It's like it goes back to that. Sometimes I have a discussion with certain atheists, and they say, they talk about time. If you give enough time, there is a chance this will happen. And we say, well, that's irrelevant to the point, because if I had I'll give this example all of the time. Yeah, it's like if you have a bowl. If I had an empty bowl, and I said, if I gave it enough time, would a chocolate cheesecake with 4 strawberries on top appear? They would say yes. No, what we say, well, the properties to make that is not in there. Time is irrelevant to the point here, and I think it's the same here. The time is irrelevant. We will in the future. I don't think they understand the problem that they face. They think you give it enough time, because they always have this concept. Give it enough time, the chances that will happen, chances this will happen. And I think they use these arguments a lot. The question,
Ali, not all. See, this is the thing. The ones who have done the research in this subject area, they understand the problem. So you have some philosophers of the mind and neuroscientists that believe consciousness is an illusion, doesn't really exist. Yes, that's one thing. They're saying we don't really have this concept of experience. Then you have others who say that consciousness is existent in all things. Yeah, even in atoms and electrons and rocks, they have a proto-consciousness.
Double slit experiment. Double slit experiment?
They have, that's so even people. Then you've got other people like Professor Donald Hoffman, who says no, conscious matter is produced by consciousness, and he gives examples like the double slit experiment and other things on the quantum mechanics. So he says this is what they call idealism. So this idea that consciousness produces material, because they're saying because there's an unbridgeable gap between explaining materialism arising consciousness, and they're saying consciousness is more fundamental because it's what we understand the world with is consciousness. So he's saying consciousness is what produces physical material. Which is a bit out there for a lot of people.
And by the way, the guy whose quote I read before, Professor David Chalmers, he is a naturalist. He's an atheist. He's not a believer, but he's pointing out and he's being honest. Like, look, this is a hard problem for us guys. So there are some atheists out there who are being honest about the problem, saying, look, we haven't solved it so far, and maybe they have some grand hope of it later on. But I think more and more people are starting to see that this is an in-principle problem. Doesn't matter how much time you have, you're not going to solve the problem.
Time is irrelevant, And I think if there's atheists watching this, we want to make something clear, because, one thing that I learned from Speaker's Corner, one thing that I learned from Ustad Hamza Zorz is that we're not here to win points over you guys. If there's atheists watching this, we're not here to be like, we got you guys. Yeah, we've cornered you. Our religion doesn't teach that. We're not here to that. We're genuinely just trying to reason with you guys and make you guys understand us, because like the brother who we had the discussion with, he was honest enough to not only accept it, but also accept Islam. So I don't want atheists to feel like, be defensive and we're trying to, mock them, etc. What we're just genuinely trying to do is show you guys why we believe there is a logical answer that, and the best possible answer to that is like God exists, and we're trying to break that down via consciousness and other things. So I just want to make that clear, because I don't want you guys to feel that we're trying to that's not our aim. Our aim is to learn from each other and for you guys to understand our point of view. Why is consciousness not a problem for Islam? So people that are watching that, they would say, okay, it's a problem for, all right, let's say us atheists and materialistically, people who see that everything is, we can observe with our senses. What about Islam? Isn't it a problem for Islam?
Go ahead, Sharif, if you want to answer.
Okay. So obviously from an Islamic point of view is that we don't believe that physical material things which are non-conscious caused us to have consciousness. We fundamentally believe that there is a unlimited independent creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is all-knowing, who has will, who has intentionality, who is therefore what we'd probably term conscious, who willfully created human beings and therefore willfully created us to have this ability to have consciousness. Now, how that mechanism of creation occurred, we don't know. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that. But what we do have now is we have an explanation of how we have consciousness. For a lot of atheists under what they call panpsychism, which is where they say, oh, matter has consciousness, even the electron has consciousness, they just assert it as a brute fact. You know, something exists, but there's no explanation why it exists.
Yeah, don't ask why.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas
we say, no, something exists within human mind, which is consciousness. How do we explain that? Well, there are many arguments for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just one. But when you go through these arguments, then you understand that what if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and he does exist, then he's the cause and creator of all things. Yeah. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exist? Because we say he's the necessary being. He's eternal, independent. He doesn't require an explanation for his own existence. But he, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, explains everybody else's existence and the properties of those existence, including the properties of human beings who have conscious awareness.
Brilliant. And Jake?
Yep. Yeah. And just to add on to that, Sharif, also in Islam, we have this concept of the ruh, or the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. We don't only believe that, for example, whether it be man or angels or jinn or even Allah himself, we don't believe that it's just material objects and that's all that exists. So the reason why consciousness, and this is what the brother saw, is that on a materialist framework, you can't make sense of consciousness. But when you have this idea that the creator himself, who's the foundation for everything that exists, is not a physical material object, okay, then we can make sense of everything else, such as our conscious experience. And all of these other things begin to fall in place, like the existence of angels doesn't seem crazy and spooky, and jinn and all this kind of stuff. It fits nicely in line as far as the package and the entire Islamic worldview. We can see, oh, well, that makes sense. Consciousness isn't some weird thing if we have a creator who himself is not a physical object, and he's the foundation for everything that exists. So once this is explained, and once you abandon materialism, then it kind of softens, in at least in my experience with this particular brother, it softened his heart, it softened his mind for him to start to consider Islam and to start consider these other understandings. And alhamdulillah, he embraced Islam in the end because of it. And this argument was a main function in that process.
May Allah bless both of you guys. It was absolutely amazing. I think we need to do more of these where we break down these concepts, inshallah, for the layman to understand. I think that was really good. That was that was amazing. Thank you both of you guys. May Allah bless both of you guys, inshallah, with the works that you're doing. I learned a lot from Ustad Sharif. Brother Jake, I'll definitely be following you from now on as well, inshallah. And yeah, brothers and sisters, if you've enjoyed that, if you want more, please let us know. If you want specific topics for us to discuss, we can do that through Ramadan, inshallah. We'll see if the brothers are free. But yeah, so that was the argument from consciousness and how it makes sense in Islam. And yeah, hope you guys learn from that, inshallah. Till next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.